Hi, fourth grade. It's Miss Bruin in the virtual lab. And during this lesson, we are going to explore how we can use signals to transfer information or send messages. In other words, how we can use patterns of light and sound to communicate. Now, before you begin to brainstorm ways of communicating using light and sound, it's really important that we understand the engineer's process. When you're building anything, whether it's some kind of code to communicate, or whether it's a treehouse, or a playground, or a tunnel for traffic to travel through, anything really. Before any engineer gets started on a project, even before the brainstorm, it's really important to be clear about three things. So before we get started thinking about how to communicate in different ways or how to design a code that will help us to do that, we need to think about three things. The first is your purpose. The second is the criteria of this project or of the engineering job. And the third are the constraints. I would argue that this is probably the most important part of the engineering process. You have to figure out whether there's a need for your design. And thinking about the purpose is going to help you do that. So, if you're going to engineer something that's worth it, you have to think about the purpose first. And the questions you see here are the ones that you have to ask yourself to make sure that your design has purpose. The first question that you have to ask yourself is, what am I creating? Then you're going to want to ask yourself, why am I creating this? Or why am I designing this? And the last question that could help you figure out the purpose of your design is, who am I designing this for? If there's nobody that's going to use it, then why? If we're thinking like an engineer, we want to think about the criteria of the project. And a couple of the big questions that you need to ask yourself as you go to think about your design is, what will it look like? How will it work? You also want to think about the smaller details like the shape of your design or the size of your design, maybe even the speed or the strength. What materials will you need in order to create this design? Do you have access to those materials? So the criteria helps you envision a little bit more clearly what you could create. But it also helps you figure out whether it's possible. So the last step that engineers always think about is something called the constraints of a project or a job. When you're designing something, you have to think about the rules or the limits involved. And a lot of times, the questions below will help you to do that. And maybe you'll have to make some changes based on the constraints of a specific job. One of the most important questions you can ask yourself is, what will it cost? If we don't have the money to build this or create this, then it's not feasible. How much time will it take to build? If it takes too long, that might not be worth it. We might have to change our idea. And a couple of other questions you might ask yourself when thinking about the restraints are, what does this kind of build require me to know? Do I have to have a certain skill set in order to create this? And lastly, where will it be built? Right? What location will it be in? And will there be some rules or limits around that location? Because where something is going to affect how it's built or how it's created. Engineers, you're about to embark on a project where you will be creating your own code or system of communication through patterns of light and sound. Before you start planning on paper, Make sure to stop and think like an engineer. Take your idea through the three-step process. Ask yourself each set of questions so that you are really clear on the purpose of your code, the criteria, and the constraints. Good luck. I can't wait to see what you create.